Welcome to On What Slender Threads. This is Tradition 9, the foundation for our society's structure. My name is Lynn. This presentation is based on a book that I wrote, On What Slender Threads, AA's 12 Traditions from a Historical Perspective. However, it is not necessary to buy the book unless you would like to have it as a resource. It is my hope that these video presentations will highlight what I learned from studying research on AA's early history, from the literature available at the General Service Office of Alcoholics Anonymous, and from the experiences and insights of AA friends around the world. I am not a spokesperson for AA. Any inferences in this study are strictly my own and in no way reflect the opinion of Alcoholics Anonymous. I hope it will be helpful. What have we accomplished so far? Well, if you've listened to the other presentations, after examining Bill's essays from a historical perspective on traditions 1 through 8, I am convinced that the points were peddled to the groups as the guidelines that his proposed conference of delegates from AA groups would follow. Unity rested on the structure of our society. The structure relied on the representative voice of AA groups making informed decisions by the group conscience on behalf of AA worldwide services. The conference would have to adhere to the guidelines posed by the 12 points to assure our future. But the conference is primarily made up of children of chaos. How would that ever be possible? This is laid out by this presentation on Tradition 9. So for me, an appropriate preamble for this tradition is, if Bill and Bob did nothing, their silence would in later years be interpreted as approval of the status quo, that is, the trustees running AA. They should try the conference. If it was a failure, they could always cancel. The movement's delegates could come down to New York and see what AA's world affairs were really like. Then they could decide whether they would take responsibility or whether they would not. Dr. Bob said, "Bill, it has to be AA's decision, not ours. Let's call that conference. It's fine with me." Tradition 9 says AA as such ought never be organized, but we may create service boards or committees directly responsible to those they serve. In the original point, the point that Bill peddled to the then about 360 groups in that era, Bill said each AA group needs the least possible organization. Rotating leadership is best. The small group may elect its secretary, the large group its rotating committee, and the groups of a large metropolitan area their central or intergroup committee, which often employs a full-time secretary. He continued with the original point by saying the trustees of the General Service Board are in effect our AA General Service Committee. They are the custodians of our AA tradition and the receivers of voluntary AA contributions by which we maintain our AA General Service Office in New York. They are authorized by the groups to handle our overall public relations, and they guarantee the integrity of our principal newspaper, the AA Grapevine. All such representatives are to be guided in the spirit of service. For true leaders in AA are but trusted and experienced servants of the whole. They derive no real authority from their titles. They do not govern. Universal respect is the key to their usefulness. Well, let's look at some highlights from Bill's essay on this tradition. He said, AA as a whole should never be organized at all. And then it seems like it's a contradiction, but we create special service boards and committees. So people ask, what do you mean by no organization? And Bill compares regular organizations, unlike AA, have the power to direct or govern. It's the essence of organizations everywhere. Yet Alcoholics Anonymous is an exception. We do not conform to this pattern. Neither the conference, the board, or the humblest group committee can issue a single directive to an AA member. And of course, what is more unpopular than an old-time AA full of wisdom who moves to another area and tries to tell the group there how to run its business? Well, it's happened, hasn't it? You've experienced that maybe. But long ago, trustees and staff members alike found that they could do no more than make suggestions, and very mild ones at that. Of course, you are at perfect liberty to handle this matter any way you please, but the majority experience in AA does seem to suggest. Bill is emphasizing that groups have autonomy and they are free to make their own decisions on how to conduct their affairs. So then he starts to talk about, as he talks about in several essays, all of the people who pushed back on these traditions, who pushed back on the idea of a conference. And he's actually quoting what they said to him. The churchmen, they are making disobedience of virtue. Defiant brats, they won't grow up and conform to social usage. I don't understand it. They must be nuts. And Bill then responds, as he has responded in every essay when he talks about the pushback. He says that unless each AA member follows to the best of his ability our suggested 12 steps to recovery, he almost certainly signs his own death warrant. His drunkenness and disillusion are not penalties inflicted by people in authority. They result from his personal disobedience to spiritual principles. And the same stern threat applies to the group itself. Unless there's approximate conformity to AA's 12 traditions, the group too can deteriorate and die. He says great suffering and great love are AA's disciplinarians. We need no others. So then he says that we don't have a hierarchy. We don't have boards to govern us. It is the difference between the spirit of vested authority and the spirit of service that our boards and our trusted servants serve. Those are two concepts which are sometimes pulled apart. In this spirit of vested service, he says, how do we get people to be our trusted servants? Well, they could be the group's informal rotating committee. They could serve the intergroup association for the area, and listen to him talk about that proposed conference, the General Service Conferences of Alcoholics Anonymous for AA as a whole. By then, he could refer to their proper name because they were starting to run. And even our foundation, once an independent board, is today directly accountable to our fellowship. Its trustees are the caretakers and expediters of our world services. The aim of our services is to bring sobriety within reach of all who want it, our primary purpose. And we are without organization, without hierarchy. We are animated only by the spirit of service, a true fellowship. Well, I never realized how much Bill staked everything he had on AA's alcoholics. He believed in AAs as citizens who would practice spiritual principles and serve the AA fellowship. But not everyone was convinced, and as I said earlier, he somehow had to show that children of chaos choose orderly chaos. In the presentation on Tradition 8, it provided an overview of the tasks AA paid service workers carry out to make 12-step work possible. However, there would be no work for paid staff without AA groups whose members serve as volunteers to help decide how to make 12-step work possible. If AA members' volunteer services are the heartbeat of Tradition 9, AA service committees are its circulatory system. Both are needed to succeed in what Bill referred to as our mission. This presentation, I apologize, is long, but it's long by necessity. I'm embarrassed to say that for my first 20 years in the program, I did not grasp fully the significance and the implication of Tradition 9. I realized that a study of this tradition should include an overview of what our world services are today and how those services are possible only through AA members' voluntary efforts. Far too often for those volunteers, general service is a mean and an isolating task. I believe all AAs can do better. I'll begin with the guidelines provided in our pamphlets and other sources to summarize the array of service positions from those that are needed to run an AA meeting to those that extend beyond the walls of the meeting. Essential to my understanding of our service structures is how service committees serve as conduits for decision making and policy shaping in AA. As I said earlier, they are the circulatory system. The last portion of this presentation will show the two important landmarks in our history of world services, how Bill fought to give AA groups a voice in AA worldwide service through the conference. And then once he accomplished that, he had more fighting to do. I will take a close look at the final battle Bill fought on behalf of the fellowship to be fully responsible for AA's worldwide services. That is, for the trustees to have a majority representation by alcoholics and be responsible for the financial and legal implications that come with those duties. For me, it was a heartbreaking endeavor that transformed my understanding of the traditions and of what it means to be responsible. Because of Bill's tenacity, we are, as he wrote in the ninth tradition, not organized. The baseline for all of this is, how is service defined? An AA service is anything whatever that legitimately helps us to reach fellow sufferers. As we have seen, the 12-step call is the greatest of AA services. Now, the phrase helps us to reach fellow sufferers does not necessarily imply a direct 12-step call, does it? Sometimes work is needed that will reach sufferers we may never see. It's just like the reason Bill wrote the big book, to reach alcoholics who could not come to Akron or New York in those early days. Reach can mean committee work that makes 12-step work possible. Bill went on in his essay to provide the long list of volunteer services that made 12-step work possible in those early days, from fixing coffee to participation on committees or working as a trusted servant to the General Service Conference. He said, though, that the litmus test for any service is this or that service really needed? If it is not, then let it be eliminated. But if it is needed, then maintain it we must, or fail in our mission to those who want and seek AA. Now, in the original form, in the first part, Bill outlined the essentials for individual groups. Each group needs the least possible organization. Rotating leadership is best. Small groups, pay heed to that. You should rotate the people who have been doing service. The small group may elect its secretary, the large group its rotating committee. In the GSO pamphlet, the AA group, there are guidelines for open and closed meetings along with suggested meeting formats and possible topics if appropriate. One doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. And usually a chair, treasurer, and secretary are helpful, but that is up to each individual group whether they need that service or not. When groups inventory their practices, an important part of that discussion is the extent to which the groups choose to exist outside the meeting. Such a discussion requires a vision of 12-step work that employs a variety of means to reach unseen alcoholics from multifaceted cultures and diverse perspectives who may be right there in the same neighborhood or on the opposite side of the globe. Such an effort usually does not provide the direct satisfaction of an eyeball-to-eyeball 12-step call. However, combined groups' potential to reach more suffering alcoholics is without comparison. Now, recall in Bill's essay on the first tradition, this is where tradition 9 comes together when he said our 12-step work forms a group. He also spoke to unity and to common welfare when he said, so at the outset, how to best live and work together as groups became the prime question. He answered that question in Tradition 9. AA's tradition of unity and common welfare is demonstrated when combined groups live and work together through Tradition 9. AA's volunteer service committees enable groups to carry out the primary purpose of AA as the fellowship's extended hand. We'll look at some of the opportunities for AA members to serve. They could serve on a representative steering committee. There are all kinds of representative steering committees across the different service entities. But to be sure, the trusted servants of such a committee are directly responsible to those they serve. They are but a subset of the group, and the committee can, as a subset, streamline the amount of discussion and research and work involved in addressing issues and then bring their recommendations to the group for a decision. Well, if you think about it, our Conference of Delegates is a representative steering committee of AA groups. AA is a cornucopia of service structures that provide opportunities to serve on committees. When a group examines how it would like to expand its service beyond the confines of the meeting, it will help to think about the impact of the service on carrying the message. They need to think about the services that achieve local outreach, the services that go out a little bit further but achieve regional outreach, and finally, what are those services that they can support that achieve national and international outreach. All of this is to say that there are usually an abundance of opportunities for members of groups who are having a hard time getting that coffee position to participate in committees. And then when they participate in these committees, they can share with their group what is going on. Now, the circulatory works because we have common committees across our various service structures. They are public information. Archives may be a good committee for an area group or a local group to have. Treatment facilities and corrections, literature and grapevine, Lavinia, cooperation with the professional community, hospitals and institutions are also included in that, although not listed here. All of these are opportunities for members to participate in service. We will see these committees echo throughout the service structure. There is also the Loners Internationalist meeting, which is a confidential bi-monthly bulletin sent to loners, homers, internationalists, port contacts, and loner sponsors. One can go to the General Service Office website and access the pamphlet SM-F-123 for more information on how to participate. And the most important, or one of the most important, are corrections correspondence for those AAs who cannot get out to a meeting. There's GSO's F-26 pamphlet on how to participate and support these struggling alcoholics. In the original form, the second part, the essentials for groups' combined efforts, also can be in the service of a central or intergroup committee. He said, and the groups of large metropolitan areas may have a central or intergroup committee, which often employs a full-time secretary. And the groups of, I have already said that, okay, and in general, a representative steering committee of volunteers from participating groups provide oversight of their intergroup or service office. The intergroup or central committee generally has the service committees that we've mentioned: public information, cooperation with the professional community, hospitals and institutions, and so on. Now, not all AA groups are in regions that can sustain an intergroup or central office. However, all AA groups in the US and Canada are geographically situated in one of 93 area committees that are associated with the AA General Service Conference. You can find your area committee by looking up the AA Service Manual online at the General Service Office of Alcoholics Anonymous. Note that there are discussions that have been going on to broaden areas from geographic to those that host the online committee. Regardless, such groups can elect to have a general service representative who serve as the group's liaison to those that are assigned to existing area committees. There are 62 other general service conferences around the world, in the UK, in Russia, in Europe. Each one is similarly composed of areas and regions. So think about it. All around the world, we have these AA volunteers who are going to carry the message beyond the walls of their meeting. Besides other service committees, the area committee and these conferences usually have service committees: public information, professional relations with the community, hospitals and institutions. Again, more service opportunities. Some areas are fortunate to have an abundance of AA groups and meetings, and it's not always possible for every AA group, however, to have a GSR. I hope that each AA member will endeavor to belong to one group that has an active general service representative. Look around. Hopefully there's a group that you can attend that's active in general service. In that way, each AA member will have an opportunity to weigh in on AA affairs. Now, some members may belong to more than one group with active GSRs, but they should be careful to only vote in one group. They should vote in only one group. If an AA member does not attend any groups with an active GSR, find one and participate, or try to encourage one of the groups that you do attend to create a service position for a GSR. Regardless, those that cannot find a group with GSR still have an important voice in Alcoholics Anonymous. They will need to work a little harder to get in touch with their area to see when agenda items are coming up or when issues are coming up, or to find out how they can submit recommendations. But whether you belong to a group with a GSR or not, every AA individual has a voice. Now, groups that have a GSR are fortunate because the GSR connects the AA group to the General Service Conference. And they do that by the GSR sharing the recommendations of the group conscience with whatever the next level committee is that they need to attend. Sometimes a district, sometimes it's different for different areas, whether there are districts or sub-districts. But regardless, if there is a district, there can be an opportunity to be a trusted servant for the district committee, and that's called a DCM in the United States and Canada. Then those representatives can go to the area committee meeting and area assemblies, which hold special meetings to discuss the agenda and also elect the delegate for the area that will attend the General Service Conference. The delegate goes to the General Service Conference and has the opportunity to fully discuss issues with the 92 other delegates all over the United States and Canada. Or if you're in another country, the X number of delegates that are all over the region that your country represents. The delegates make recommendations, final decisions called advisory actions to the Board of Trustees, or recommendations called additional considerations. And then the trustees, also volunteers, act as custodians of AA's corporate entities and implement the decisions and recommendations of the conference if they are financially viable and within the bounds of legal constraints. All in these levels of reporting must report back. So the trustees report back to the delegates, report back to the area committee, and ultimately the GSR can expect a report back on what unfolded so that they can go to their AA group. So there it is. The General Service Conference is a representative steering committee. And remember that the first concept in AA's Legacy of Service states that the final responsibility and ultimate authority for AA World Services should reside in the collective conscience of our whole fellowship. Bill did a lot of thinking about this structure. How could he make it work so that all AA groups could be responsible? Our General Service Conference in the U.S. and Canada has 135 members. 2/3 of the voting body are delegate, and 1/3 are made up of the trustees and the staff, non-trustee directors, and non-alcoholic staff. In essence, in the U.S. and Canada, over 90% of the voting body are members of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it is that collective conscience which carries the message to the alcoholic who still struggles. All groups who participate by having an active general service representative can exercise that responsibility and that authority, that input. Now, to see our circulatory system at work, remember I said our committees are our circulatory system, and traditions 8 and 9 come together to make that circulatory system fluid. The interactions between those pivotal service committees are our connective tissue that binds the group to AA World Services and to most intergroup and central offices. The center column lists the subset of General Service Conference committees. The right column lists the trustees committees that work in tandem with those committee volunteers. The left column lists the corresponding offices where paid workers per the 8th tradition support the trusted servants per tradition 9 by assisting with the preparation, discussion, and recommendations of the conference and trustees committees. This is a lot of work. We desperately need skilled staff to get that work done. There is an abundance of activity that continues before and after the conference. The General Service Board, our trustees, meet quarterly to carry projects to fruition. The area committee, usually again, as I've said before, has the same committees described in this table. Those committees depend on volunteers from the area to review policies and literature so that they can find ways to improve carrying the message to suffering alcoholics in their area. Individuals and groups can propose improvements or clarity to existing resources, or they can even propose new resources. This could require back and forth with the relevant offices in the General Service Office, and it certainly helps to involve the area's delegate. AA staff accumulate a wealth of knowledge and information throughout the year, which makes them important members of the conference. And of course, this would not be possible without our 7th tradition. That ensures AA's independence from outside influence as protected by our philosophy of self-support. Only AA members and AA groups are allowed to contribute to the finances and provide the voluntary work of its service committees. In particular, groups elect how to partition their excess contributions should they choose to support their intergroup, central office, district, or other entity, their area, or the conference through the General Service Board, and that is after they've supported the work that they want to do locally. Guidelines are in the pamphlet Self-Support, Where Money and Spirituality Mix, provided by the General Service Office, and please remember, those are simply suggested guidelines. The final decision is up to the group. AA Online has grown exponentially so that it's now a common experience for AAs from around the world to not only share an AA meeting, but to also share ideas for carrying the message. Therefore, the potential for AA service worldwide is a new and exciting arena for sharing and demonstrating AA's primary purpose. Through active and engaged volunteers in the service structure channel, AA groups that choose to exist outside the meeting can contribute new and exciting ideas for carrying the message. All of this is to say we have much work to do. We need AAs to participate. In the original form, Part 3, Bill then goes back to the General Service Board and says that the trustees of the General Service Board are in effect our AA General Service Committee. They are the custodians of our AA tradition and receivers of our voluntary AA contributions by which we maintain our General Service Office in New York. Each of the conferences throughout the world have their own set of trustees that run the affairs for their respective conferences. They are authorized by the groups to handle our overall public relations. This is an important phrase to remember in conjunction with our policy of anonymity. There is no individual AA or no individual AA group that is charged with handling AA's public relations, that is, its image with the public. Our General Service Board is given that charge. They guarantee the integrity of our principal newspaper, the AA Grapevine and the AA General Service Office. We'll talk more about the responsibilities of anonymity in Traditions 11 and 12. Harkening back to the last paragraph in Bill's essay on the ninth tradition, one can see his determination to reinforce the future conference's strength when he said, even our foundation, once an independent board, is today directly accountable to our fellowship. Its trustees are the caretakers and expediters of our world services. Oh my goodness. Well, and yet Bill claimed AA was not organized? Well, how and why was that? For me, it helped to go back to the years before the conference when all decisions for AA's future were made by headquarters, mostly Bill and Dr. Bob and some of the staff, and by the Alcoholic Foundation's trustees, the majority of whom were non-alcoholic. We will then conclude with the remaining portion of the original form of the ninth tradition. This is the part that changed my perspective on the traditions. It altered me forever. Now, in its early beginnings, AA was organized. That is, there was a hierarchy. The trustees were in charge, sort of, and they did defer to Bill a lot. In 1938, before the big book was written, that was essential that the trustees be majority non-alcoholic to oversee AA's fiscal affairs for two reasons: to ensure the trust of donors and to protect the alcoholics from themselves. Less than 10 years later, after inconceivable growth and success, Bill fretted about AA's survival with non-alcoholics comprising a majority of the board. Here was his concern. The main link between our world services and AA staff had been Dr. Bob, our Secretary of Staff, and me. To our worldwide fellowship, its devoted board of trustees was scarcely known at all. Not one AA in 1,000 could name even half of them. Bill pointed out the danger inherent in his and Dr. Bob's inescapable association as AA's leaders. When death or disability finally took us few old-timers out of the picture, where would that leave the trustees and headquarters? Bill continued to paint a picture of doom as he believed was inevitable, including the trustees could make a devastating mistake that would result in AA Group's failure of confidence. Headquarters in AA, he said, would collapse, and finally Bill struck the final blow to the status quo by saying it was evident that here was a worldwide movement that had no direct access to its own principal service affairs. The trustees had authority over our services. AA itself had no authority. The simple trustee had been ideal guardian for our infancy and adolescence, but how in the future could it possibly go on functioning as it had? These were Bill's arguments that he laid out before the trustees, before older members of the fellowship, and before the groups for having a conference of represented delegates from the AA groups. He believed this was how AA groups could have a say in policy. Well, the trustees initially objected, and so did some longtime members to the proposed conference. Bill's response was nothing short of a temper tantrum, but with the help of a compromise between trustees Bernard Smith and Leonard Harrison, the first annual conference of delegates from the groups began its 5-year trial in 1951. Well, actually, it was a 4-year trial. However, Dr. Harry Tebow was not at all convinced that alcoholics would ever be mature enough to handle the responsibilities of AA's global outreach, especially with those crazy traditions that encouraged anarchy and discouraged leadership. When raising the issue of the chronic immaturity of alcoholics, Tebow's first case in point was usually Bill. So now the games began. After reading Bill's report of the first 1951 experimental conference, Tebow, in a fury, pointed out the dangers of historical distortion, egotism, and damaging ingratitude. Remember Bill's on-the-road yarns? He did embellish quite a bit. Bill agreed that his telling of AA's early history lacked clarity, but went on to deny vigorously any intentional historical distortion that resulted in the early fellowship appearing self-sufficient or mature. Bill then continued resentfully that he had been giving credit to many of the fellowship's non-alcoholic friends, including Tebow. Well, you can hear the shades of immaturity there, but the bottom line was the experimental conference had only met once, and Bill was already on the defensive with Tebow, who would become a Class A trustee in 1957. Bill's defensiveness only served to reinforce Tebow's argument about the immaturity of alcoholics, especially Bill. As Tebow pointed out, alcoholics claim they have an obsessively compulsive inclination to addictive dependency, and they declare that self-reliance is dangerous to their recovery. How can such impaired individuals ever say at the same time that they are mature? Was that contradiction not the best proof of immaturity? The denial of the reality of dependence? You have to read that several times to take it in, and Bill did. Bill took Tebow's points to heart and spent the next 4 years searching for answers to this conundrum. Kurtz pointed out that Bill's search was reflected in the themes he selected for each of the succeeding experimental conference. A good story about how all of this unfolded is in Kurtz's book, Not God. Now, remember the 1951 conference theme Bill identified as not to govern but to serve. Bill then called the 1952 conference Progress. We here must dedicate ourselves to ensure that there is never any government in the hearts of Alcoholics Anonymous, which was a declaration by the non-alcoholic trustee chair, Bernard Smith. somewhat hopeful. The next conference's theme was also hopeful, but Bill's frustration in trying to find answers and Tebow's challenge was evident. He called it "We Are Standing on the Threshold of Maturity" in 1953. Ironically, in the final report, Bill admitted no one can say in truth that we are really mature yet. The process of maturing will go on as long as we last. Well, threshold indeed. The next conference's theme was contradictory, given Bill believed his prediction about alcoholics losing confidence in AA was starting to come true. In 1954, it was confidence and responsibility. And following that conference, Bill wrote a friend about some examples of plain irresponsibility that had risen from members' sense of separation from the trustees of the Alcoholic Foundation. Well, driven by his lack of confidence in the trustees, Bill pushed the name change of the Alcoholic Foundation to the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous. He had somewhat of an impact on how trustees would be selected. It continued to be essentially from within the trustees, although the elective process was slightly opened and formalized. Bill declared at the last experimental conference to be a pivotal moment in alcoholics' responsibility for AA, and it most certainly was monumental. He called it the 1955 Coming of Age. The annual conference's successful 5-year trial, which was really 4 years, resulted in a formal handing over to the membership as represented by the General Service Conference of the 3 legacies of Alcoholics Anonymous: recovery, unity, and service. He had his conference. AA's had a voice. In that 5-year period, alcoholic delegates demonstrated that AA members could not only suit up and show up, but also provide valuable perspectives to solving some of AA's problems. Don't forget the second tradition, with the help of the second tradition. But for Bill, that was not enough, which leads us to Bill's final battle for AA groups. And that would be having majority representation of alcoholics on the Board of Trustees. Bill would not let go of his obsession that alcoholics' majority representation on the board was essential to AA's long-term survival. Bill believed that many people who suffered from the disease would not be attracted to a program that perpetuated the idea that alcoholics could never recover enough to be responsible for their own program. Why would they come? His problem in achieving that outfold was twofold. After the conference had completed its successful trial and was now officially underway, Bill still needed to sway the trustees and the delegates, and unfortunately, both were skeptical. Each year, from 1956 through 1962, the delegates advised retaining the non-alcoholic majority on the board. From their perspective, everything seemed to be working. During that time, Bill continued to hold back. He said that he would on advocating for ratio change, but he was smoldering when he wrote, "At the forthcoming conference, I am having nothing to say whatever about the trustee ratio. I really did quit at St. Louis and meant to." It was not long before Bill started using his abrasive tactics again, on the heels of writing, "Nobody wishes to quit the pop-up business any more eagerly than I do. AA needs to stand on its own feet. That's the primary thing. What am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to transfer the remainder of my leadership to a board in which I cannot have full confidence?" You see, Bill was afraid that when he died as leader of AA, it would be left to the trustees and there would be problems. He wanted leadership to belong to the groups. He wanted leadership to belong to alcoholics. He said, "I am fully fed up with it. I agreed to turn over full responsibilities to the groups, So when they still refuse to name a majority of their own membership to run their own affairs, I wonder if they are really doing this. It looks to me rather that they were consulting their fears rather than their trust. In 1961, spurred by the inactive stance of the delegates, Bill submitted its own list of Class B nominees, stressing the responsibilities of responsibility itself. The predictable, if not annoying Tebow, now a trustee, promised to vote against the change. Tebow wrote, "Most AAs are not impressed by the need to grow up. I'm not very much moved by the emphasis on growing up. Most adolescents are very conscious of having grown up. The trouble is, they do not know that they still have a lot to learn." I mean, my goodness, between the delegates and the trustees, Bill could not win. In the meantime, Bill did write the 12 Concepts for World Services. His essays outline the why of AA service structure with substantive components that meticulously describe the how of AA service structure. Key to this discussion, Bill said that one of the ideas prevalent throughout the concepts is that no group or individual should be set in unqualified authority over another. The delegates accepted the concepts but continued to support the non-alcoholic majority representation on the board. Good grief. Almost 10 years after the AA Comes of Age conference, 10 years, Tebow finally came around. Bill prevailed with the following idea, that while alcoholics may be chronically immature, we cannot deny that, that did not mean they could not be responsible. I can't help but wonder if the concepts were a factor in Tebow's change of heart. I mean, after all, while the tradition spoke to how groups avoid irresponsibility, the concepts spoke directly to how groups assume responsibility. Dr. Tebow agreed to vote for the ratio change in 1964, but the work was not done. There are no coincidences, though, because that next year in 1965, at AA's 30th anniversary, the International Convention's keynote was, for the first time in AA, the Declaration. Bill knew that he was almost across the finish line. Bill and Lois closed the convention with 10,000 AA attendings holding hands and reciting, "I am responsible. When anyone, anywhere reaches out for help, I want the hand of AA always to be there, and for that, I am responsible." AA's achieving majority representation on their own board coincides with the responsibility declaration. As emotional and moving as that moment must have been, I rarely get through talking about this without crying. There was still a bit of work to do to overcome Bill's heavy-handed tactics. Dr. Jack Norris, a trustee, claims that he swayed the other reluctant trustees. He said, at the time the majority was set up, nobody had more than 3 years sobriety in AA, and they didn't trust themselves in the money department. I said, give it a try. If it doesn't work, we can change it. And it was that easy, says Dr. Jack Norris. Well, I think Bill might have disagreed with the "it was that easy" part, but nonetheless, the conference recommended and the board approved two-thirds alcoholic trustees majority representation in 1966. And from that point on, AA's future has belonged to alcoholics. So now, when our trustees make a mistake, when our conference makes a mistake, that belongs to all AA groups, which is why our involvement is so essential. And for that, AA members are responsible. Currently, there are 7 Class A trustees and 14 alcoholic Class B trustees. The Class B trustees are in 3 categories: 8 regional trustees, 6 from the U.S., 2 from Canada, 4 general service trustees, 2 from Alcoholics Anonymous World Services Incorporated and 2 from the Grapevine Incorporated, and 2 trustees at large, 1 from the U.S. and 1 from Canada. The 2 trustees at large, remember, attend the World Services meeting that brings all the other conferences and other entities together. In the original form, Part 4, we are not organized. As Bill says, all representatives are to be guided in the spirit of service, for true leaders in AA are but trusted and experienced servants of the whole. They derive no real authority from their titles. They do not govern. Universal respect is the key to their usefulness, and that includes the trustees, the delegates, our area chairs and leaders, our district leaders, and our GSRs. In short, as codified by the traditions and the concepts, there is no governing hierarchy in Alcoholics Anonymous. As underscored by this last portion of the original form of the tradition, AA's trustees are the trusted servants to the AA groups. Ultimately, AA groups are responsible for AA. I have to admit, I felt a little powerless about what went on with our conference until I did this study. And then I realized I am not powerless. I am a member of AA. I can participate. When I started this study, I just wanted to have a better understanding of the traditions. I had no idea there were Bill's path to the general service structure. As a result of this discussion, hopefully groups will contact their area committee for facilitating an exploration of, or even a brief overview of, the AA Service Manual combined with the 12 Concepts for World Service, a wonderful document that's easily to view online from the General Service Office. And if not done already, groups will elect a volunteer for the critical AA Communications Channel position of GSR, and other AAs will participate in committees, the circulatory system for carrying the message. Bill emphasized the role of trusted servants, no matter what the servant's position is. Indeed, general service requires a substantial amount of heavy lifting. However, Bill makes it clear that service for inside the meeting and for outreach are equally important. There is no higher echelon of service. And I'd like to go back to that preamble because it strikes me, after thinking about all of this, when Bill met with Bob to talk about approving the conference. It was written that if Bill and Dr. Bob did nothing, their silence would in later years be interpreted as approval of the status quo, that is, the trustees running AA. They should try the conference. What I've learned in these recent years is that if we, Alcoholics Anonymous members, do nothing, our silence will be interpreted as approval of the status quo. Coming up, the presentation will be on the 10th tradition. Now, one would think that with all of Bill's trials in establishing the service structure for AA, he would be the staunchest defender of the traditions. Well, when we explore Tradition 10, we'll learn how the trustees, headquarters, and Bill occasionally faltered under the pressures of outside issues. Comments and questions, or if you want to be on a mailing list for upcoming workshops, please email me at whatslenderthreads@gmail.com. And for other resources and flyers, see www.onwhatslenderthreads.com. And thank you.